Hey, welcome to the iPhoneography podcast. I'm Greg McMillan. This is Monday, May the 19th as we record. And tonight we're going to talk about dealing with bright skies in our pictures. It's something that it can be a little challenging at times. Why wait? Let's bring these guys in. Dave Podner and Dwight Broman. Hey, guys.
Good evening, everyone.
Greg. Hey, everybody.
So, Dave, you come up with this idea about dealing with bright skies, and I think it's a great idea. Now, the iPhone can handle skies pretty good, but with Smart HDR and the pixel by pixel processing and all that stuff that these things do, but still, there could be times when if the camera decides to pay more attention to the foreground, then sometimes the sky and more specifically even clouds will suffer and possibly lose some of that detail. So we're going to kind of go through a few different ideas here that might help folks deal with this. And I think the first thing is fixing it in post, right? So, and I think most of the iPhone photographers will probably edit in the Photos app. So, Dave, what kind of things could you do in the Photos app that would help, deal with these bright skies?
Yeah, and the Photos app, especially in the last couple of years, has gotten tremendously better with their editing. Where if you're a longer time iPhone photographer, the built-in Photos app really didn't have a lot you could do. Where now you can do things like reduce the highlights and increase the shadows. And a lot of that, the very bright sky isn't just the sky you have to deal with. It's the fact you have bright sky, which can also wash out whatever is on the ground. So you have... or make the shadows way, way too dark. If it's I figure if it's a bright sun or a bright sky, you're probably having pretty harsh shadows going on. So it's something you have to look out for that way. So when I did on a photo, and that's Greg, that's the one I did the before and after that I put in the thing, is that...
Yeah, and I'll pull that up here while you're talking.
Is that I reduced the highlights, and then I reduced the shadow. So in a way, I did reduce the contrast, but by doing it separately, you have a little bit more play, a little bit more control than just hitting that contrast slider. Also, after adjusting the shadows, I went into the black point to make sure that it didn't get grayed out kind of area down below. So you can see...
and this is your before image. And, so you can see that it's, maybe my screen brightness isn't very good. Okay, yeah, it was turned down a bit. Okay. So yeah, this is your before image. And, there's some parts of the clouds that are maybe just a little too white.
Yeah, a little too peaking there. And it was, it's kind of a weird cloud pattern that was going on up there. The front was just about to start coming through on this day. So if I would have went out, it was took a walk at lunch. And if I would have went out just a few minutes or maybe half hour earlier, it would have been complete blue sky. And as I left work, which was like 2 hours late, 3 hours later, it was completely overcast.
Oh, wow.
So this is a transition, but it's broke up enough where the breaks in the clouds really, it can do a lot. It can really hit a lot of peak for the whiteness there. So I didn't want exactly, and I didn't want to just reduce everything down because you have the trees there, and I didn't want the trees to be just completely dark or in shadow there. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying about the highlights. And if you use a more advanced program with sliders, or you deal with the graph where you can move points up down below, it's very similar. And that gives you a lot more control. It's not as easy, but it's that, the trade-off. If you have easy use, you don't have the control. But if you have the control you want, most of the time you're going to have a lot of you're going to have to have a lot of experience to get it just right.
Yeah. Yeah. So after you've adjusted this is the
Yeah.
after. And I'm seeing, a little more, like you may have done more than just deal with the bright areas of the clouds, but the white areas in the clouds aren't so white now. They look a little more natural to me,
Yeah,
and
he brought
there's a
out
little
more
more
detail.
saturation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's a little more saturation in the sky. Maybe that's a byproduct of
Mm-hmm.
adjusting for the whiteness in the clouds. But you still have your detail in the foreground in the trees and that
Right.
too. So that's good.
And now one advantage that also the iPhone 16 has is they have the new photographic styles. So I went
Right.
from the built-in to natural on this one. And
Okay. Yeah.
natural tends to it's not as the colors aren't as deep that I
Okay.
notice
Yeah.
versus others. So it's almost the old-fashioned iPhone photography where it's like it isn't something that's just going to pounce out at you.
Hmm.
Like we know Samsung in the past, and I still think most Android um, photography and thing, they tend to tweak it to make it punchier. Where natural, if you use a natural, it takes away all the punch. So it gives you a nice starting point. That if you wanted to, you can increase it a little bit here, a little bit here. And for this photo, I didn't want to overdo the adjustments.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just wanted just to tweak it a little bit here.
Yeah. And I think it looks good. I mean, I think there's a really big improvement in the clouds. In fact, I'll go back to the first one, and I mean, yeah, it's lacking some detail, and when you look at clouds like this, the detail is it's not you know sharpness and things like that. It's just the makeup of the clouds. It's there's light areas, there's dark areas and whatnot, but it just seems to be almost overexposed a little bit, even though it's not. But it just
Mhm.
you kind of get that vibe that it is. But then when you go back to your fixed version, I see more of the darker areas are coming out to give it a little more drama, and it just looks more natural to me. It looks more like what was actually there without even being there. But I've been looking at clouds all my life, and this looks more like natural clouds to me. So I think that's a pretty good fix. So some of the adjustments, you can adjust the highlights and things like that. The brilliance, I think, is a great adjustment that you can make
Mhm.
in the Photos app, because from what I understand, it's designed to not blow out the highlights and not
Yeah.
kill the
That's
shadows.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
There's no clipping indicators in the native app. In the native,
No.
no,
yeah.
No.
no. And to me, that's a problem.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I just hope iOS 19 has a little more quote unquote pro types of features like that. Like even just a histogram, anything to um, help users when they're working on their images, prevent them from going overboard like that. I just think something like that would be invaluable. But
Yeah. I mean,
but yeah, I mean, and
we talked about before just having and I don't think they're going to do a separate app like they did for video, where there's a separate app, the Final Cut, the Final Cut camera, but similar to, and like I said, we talked about this, similar to the calculator, advanced mode, just a little switch,
yeah,
advanced
yeah,
mode. But it looks like, and we're starting to see some leaks because WWDC so close that now these leaks could not be, they could put more stuff in still, but the leaks are more of everything looks floaty and
hmm,
rounded and more circles. So
yeah,
if you've ever seen anyone play with the Vision Pro and how that has like transparent, translucent overlays over things, and they're not exactly squares. They're not that. That's kind of the overall feel for what it may look like.
Yeah, yeah. So another way to fix the skies is Dwight. You've got. I think I'm at the wrong one here. No, this is your first image.
I want the one with the arrow. Yeah.
You want that one first?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't normally have an issue shooting with my iPhone and with the skies because I always try to expose for the brightest areas in my photo. And I think, while shooting, if I'm shooting raw, I've got a good chance of recovering my shadows and additional details within the highlights. I found this photo, and when I brought it into Photoshop, right where that arrow is pointing was blown out. So it was pure white. So if you printed this photo, there would be absolutely no detail right there. It would just be, white ink or whatever. So,
well, it'd be blank paper.
Yeah,
right?
blank paper. So,
yeah,
an alternate way of fixing this, and everybody's pretty familiar, I think, with the sliders. You got your black point and your white. You can do that, but I am in love with curves because you can work within all different tonal ranges along the curve, and I'll show you how I fix this. So this is the blown out version, and the bottom of the original one, in the a lot of the blacks were crushed down in the rocks down there. So I saw the blue indicators down there, and I saw the red indicators up at the arrow there. So I knew I had blown out highlights and crushed shadows.
And you're talking about zebra stripes.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So now we go to the one that you fixed.
Yeah. So what I did was I went to curves, and I'll show you in a second what I did, but I was able to recover detail in that spot that was blown out before, and I was able to lift the shadows enough down in the rocks so it wasn't going to print black ink. It's it's going to give some detail down there. So if you go to the next one, Greg, so this is the curve, right? And this doesn't show the clipping indicators, but normally in your histogram, on the left side of it, you've got your shadows, and on the right side of it, you've got your highlights, just like right here. So I don't want to confuse anybody really, and I don't want to make this a lesson on curves, but the bottom left-hand corner of the curve is your darks, your darkest darks, and the upper right-hand corner of the curve is your brightest brights. And everything in between is, your highlights, and, gets down into your midtones and then down into your shadows. So the way I fix that,
and just real quick though, I should say, for those watching on YouTube, you can obviously see this quite well. But if you're looking at it on the podcast app, what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop into just the square area. Where it really matters here, and then hopefully that shows well on the podcast app, because it's it's basically on your iPhone screen that's going to show this, and there's a fair bit of text on here, and the text just basically says what you're talking about here now. So
and I knew this would be confusing, so I'm going to try to keep it really simple. So the upper right hand side are your highlights, the lower left hand side of your curve are your shadows. And the way I got rid of it was I dragged that point on the upper right straight down very slowly until my clipping warnings went away for the highlights. And then on the bottom left, I picked them up really slowly until most of the blue was gone. It's okay, I think, in my opinion, to have a little bit of blues crushed, not to the extent that it was there. But this is a simple way of doing it. Yeah. And then I think Greg mentioned, or Dave mentioned in his last time, sometimes when you introduce this kind of adjustment, you may need to follow up with adding additional contrast because it kind of flattens out the image. If you take that lower left one and you keep raising it, you'll start getting a flatter and flatter, blacks in
You
your
have that
image.
faded look,
Yeah,
right?
it gets faded, and which is good for, a retro look. You add some, grain to it. There's all kinds of things you can do with this curve. So you can.
Mhm.
It's good to get familiar with this thing, play around with it, see what it does. But that's another way to fix your highlights and shadows there.
Now, this curve tool is available in Photomator,
Hmm.
Darkroom. Um, I mean, it's even available in Luminar Mobile.
Yep.
So there are apps. I think it might even be available in Snapseed. I'm not sure,
I believe it
but
is.
there's
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, if you obviously it's not available in the Photos app,
Hmm.
but there are other apps, and if it's available in Snapseed, that's free. You're golden. You can play around with it and see how it works, because it is a very good tool to use. So if you're watching or listening, don't think you're out of luck if you don't have if because we don't have curves in the Photos app, but there are other ways to access this, and I think it'll be interesting. And we've talked about this before, but I think it'll be very interesting to see what Apple does with Photomator, going forward, like maybe even as soon as iOS 19. Are they going to integrate some of that stuff into Photos and make it, give it maybe an advanced mode or something? I mean, that would be just super if they did that.
Yeah.
So I mean, but we'll see, right?
I think
So
it would be great, and I think the advantage of working within a curve is with a slider you're making a global adjustment. Here you can pick kind of your tonal range you want to work with. So just a kind of a
yeah,
step up, I think, from using the sliders, and another option. And but
yep,
if you
yep.
but if your photo is completely blown out and the highlights are completely not recoverable, that's really tough. And then you have to start getting into some creative ways of
Hmm.
filling that area with things, and that's way down the road.
For those watching, my dog Ginger is trying to make another appearance, but I was on with Shane yesterday, Shane Moston, and we did a live stream, and of course she had to make her appearance. So I tried to pick her up. Now didn't work, but anyway, so I'm
Hey,
sure she'll
Ginger.
be back. So anyway, but yeah, so Curves is a very powerful tool, and I mean, you can go on to say that you can do just curve adjustments in just the red channel, blue channel, or green channel
Hmm.
to alter the color and the color tones of an image. I mean, it's a pretty powerful tool, and we could probably do a whole show just on curves at some
We
point.
can do a couple shows on it. Yep.
Yeah, probably. So yeah, so another thing that you can do is and again, Photos won't be able to do this, but you can use sky replacement. Um, it's not something that, like Dave, you used to use sky replacement in the
Yeah.
Photoshop camera app,
Photoshop camera,
and
and it did.
some of the stuff that you put out was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was really digging it, and then it went away, right? You said that is it that feature's gone away or that app has gone away?
Yeah, the app completely went away, and I've even trying to use it because you have to sign into an Adobe for free, have an Adobe login. And when I tried to use it, it said, "Oh, sorry, this isn't available, and we killed it, and you can't use it now." So I think what they did is they used that camera app as a test for a lot of the sky replacement, and they put that into Photoshop now. Because there's Adobe Photoshop for the iPhone now, and it has almost the exact same select the sky, and then you can replace it, do it that way too.
Oh yeah. Well, there's there's Luminar Mobile is the one that I use to do this. This image here back in the winter when we had our snowpocalypse, the sky like okay, so I took it as a raw photo, and I exposed more for the foreground, and I wasn't too concerned about the sky because it was just basically white clouds, like completely overcast. It wasn't like it was they weren't really gray clouds. They were just almost white, and they certainly show up like that in the image. So when I was looking at this photo, I thought, there's got to be something I could do to make this look a little better. And I'm not a real big user of sky replacements, but if I think the image can be a little better because of it, I'll do it. And of course I'll disclose it too. And Dwight, you said you're not a real proponent of sky
I'm not a big
replacements either,
fan.
right?
But if if you've got a sky that you just can't work with, and highlights are blown out, you can't recover anything. It's worth a shot. But it really comes
Yeah.
down to how well the program isolates the sky from the rest of the photo. In a lot of cases, you can tell that it's getting better, but a lot of cases you can tell that it's been replaced.
Yeah. And Luminar Mobile actually does a pretty decent job. So here's the version with the sky replaced. And as you can see, even in the top right-hand corner, it put so what it does is there's different skies you can use, and a sunset sky would obviously not work for this photo. So I selected an overcast sky, or a gray day sky with a little more cloud details in it. And I just kind of shifted around and put things where I thought they might work the best. And it actually, the masking and everything else is really, really good, because there's a lot of areas where there's so little detail, or very small details in amongst the trees and things like that. And it just worked. It worked really well. And I think it looks natural. Like if I posted this picture and didn't say that I replaced the sky, I honestly don't think anybody would know any different.
Yeah, that looks pretty good, Greg.
Yeah.
I'd want to see the original again, just to look. That tree on the right is, if there's some masking issues with that on the outside.
There's the original.
Yeah. And then go to the new one. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You can adjust in Luminar Mobile, you can adjust how it blends.
Sure.
There's a couple of ways you could play around with that. I don't remember if I did that or not. Maybe I just did the switch and that was it. But it just takes a photo that has a plain white sky, and this is in the middle of winter, so as if there's not enough white in this image. But it just makes the sky look a little more dramatic. It gives it some detail, and I just think it improves the image. This isn't something that I would sell or even print, really, because it's just a picture of the river down at the park, and I just don't think it's worthy of all that attention. But I thought it was a great example of what you could do to the sky to deal with a bright sky, to make it a little more interesting, I guess, is the best word I could think of. So
and kind of similar to that, Photomator does generally a really good job with the with the automatic sky selection.
Yes, it does.
So it doesn't have a replacement, but you can at least make adjustments to it. One I did recently, it was like your first sky. It was pretty much like instead of being a white slab, it was a gray slab. And it, for whatever reason, only took like half of it. So I did a linear mask on top of it. So you can, because you can do like, I want to add and either brush it in, and I did a linear one, and it kind of just got all the sky then doing that linear one.
Yeah. And I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you mentioned that, Dave, is the linear gradient. Actually, I think one of my recent photos might have that. I forget which ones I submitted. Getting old. But yeah, it can really help bring out some of the detail, in clouds, whether it's a blue sky with a few clouds in it, or a completely grayed over sky. There could be detail in those clouds that can be brought out with with a linear gradient. And when you apply the gradient, then you can play with the contrast and the exposure and that sort of thing to get that detail that you want.
Yeah, Greg, another
Wow.
option is to dodge and burn as well. So you can, like those clouds in the
Yeah.
background, I can pull the darkest tones out of those clouds. I can pull the mid tones out of those clouds and the lighter
Mhm.
tones. And I can, brush in a little bit more contrast. You make them those areas a little bit more dark. I could even
Yeah.
tone down the highlights a little bit if I isolate those. So you can have a lot of fun with that. That's another
Mhm.
option.
Yeah. So I just took a quick peek here at our recent photos, and I do have. Oh, there's that dog again. I do have the one that I was thinking of, where I can illustrate just what you said there, Dwight, about the dodging and burning, because I know I did that, and I know I did the linear gradient to the sky on that one. So stay tuned, folks. But
Greg, before you move off, another
yep.
program that can do a good job, it isn't a direct sky replacement, Photo Room. I use it to
Yeah.
take out subjects, but it
Hmm.
will also do things like, if for your original photo, it may, and it's automated, so you got to be careful what it picks and what it doesn't pick up. But it may just take everything but the background, and then you can find another image or pull image out of what they have and just kind of put that in there and
Oh
then
yeah. Yep.
do a layer that way. So you have your original
Hmm.
image and you have your your sky underneath it, and do take care of it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that photo room is pretty cool. Look what you did with the blue caddy. I love that
Yeah.
picture. And you could make things. You could even make the sky. Like if you manage to somehow get just the sky selected in that app, you can give it that blur effect that you gave
Hmm.
in the blue caddy picture
Oh,
to
very
make it
easy.
look like there's
Yeah.
motion,
Yeah.
right?
You can do that very
Which is
easy.
pretty
Yeah.
cool. Oh yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So, um, yeah. So there's different things that you could do. With different apps and whatnot to help deal with bright skies. And I mean, I think there's a lot more ways that you can do it than what we're just talking about here. But we just kind of had a few ideas to roll around. I'm just looking at our notes here. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything that's there. So the Photos app, Lightroom Mobile is a powerful app that you can
Hmm.
use as well. Now the excuse me, the masking is a paid feature in Lightroom Mobile. Um, I think it's a paid feature in Photomator. I think Photomator is free, but you can subscribe to it or buy it outright as well. So I mean, it's unfortunate, but a lot of these apps are like this. They give you the good stuff behind a paywall. But Snapseed, I'm not sure
I don't
what all it. I don't use it enough to really know
from
how powerful it
yeah,
is.
from when I'm using it, it doesn't have a masking like that.
Right.
In fact, it's kind of spot work where you can brighten
Hmm.
and change bits.
Yes, it's got
It
the
gives
dodge
you,
and the burn, and
but it only gives you like you can't like manually select it. You can select
right.
like a circular area, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's a little kludgy doing it that way. Honestly, for something like, especially since a lot of the masking of areas is getting 100% automated now, I don't mind so much paying the money for it because
Right.
it's a lot of R&D for the program to automatically say, "Oh, you want that object? Boom, you have that object." Versus
Yeah.
back in the day, "Oh, you want that object? Okay, I hope you have a pencil or maybe a Wacom tablet because if you have a mouse, you're going to be spending an awful lot of time getting those little details there, which are pixel by pixel if you want it exactly done right."
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Um, so Dwight, any last second, tips or secrets? Like I know, Snapseed has a really cool drama feature in it, like a drama filter, I guess you could say. But again, it's a global adjustment. But
Yeah.
but you were talking a little bit about tonal ranges.
Yep.
So for those out there that maybe use Photoshop or Affinity Photo or an app like that, well, Photoshop especially, that is And I've seen you play with that stuff, and it's just crazy good.
Yeah, there's an update to one of the panels that I use, and if I hit the button on the panel with the shift, it'll give me 5 different. Let me see. It'll give me 5 different tones for brightness. So say like lights 1 through lights 5, and I can adjust each one of those individually to kind of get the photo within those ranges to kind of get the photo where I want. And it's super fun, and it's non-destructive. So I'm really not a big fan of global adjustments. I do it sometimes, with, the HSL or saturation or vibrance. But I even will go in and find out what colors are least saturated and work with those. So yeah, I've kind of moved away from global adjustments thanks to Photoshop and panels. Now you guys are getting me jealous. I got to find my cat now.
Yes, the world.
David, I just held up our pets.
The world famous Leo. Yes, the world famous Leo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hang on. There we go. When I mentioned the dog earlier, I said it's an Australian Terrier, and Shane Mawson comes on and says, just like a normal terrier, but swears and drinks a lot. And that is true. That is true about this dog. If I could understand what her barks are, I swear she is swearing, because you let her out back and she runs around the yard and she barks at nothing. So she's probably just cussing her head off. And then she drinks a lot. I've never seen a dog drink as much water as she does. But anyway, so that's a little side note. But yeah, the infamous Leo, Tiny Shutter episode 247. Check it out. It's priceless. Leo made his introduction to the world, and it was pretty funny stuff. But anyway, so Shane says, don't give your dog Foster's. It will notify our SPCA. I don't think anybody drinks Foster's.
Oh, I do.
Foster's Lager.
That's good.
In Australia. Yeah, in Australia they don't though.
No, Australia.
That's probably the Budweiser of Australia, I would imagine.
I'm not a beer connoisseur, so I don't know. The first taste of beer I ever had was Labatt 50, and that is probably the equivalent to donkey urine. It was so bad, and I think that's why I don't drink beer.
I think one of the first that I had was Tuborg Gold from Canada, because I used to spend my summers in Michigan across the river there, and that was 8%.
Yeah.
So
yeah. What about you, Dave? What was your first taste of beer?
I forget, and honestly, I don't like beer.
I don't either.
I mean, I don't like really anything malted, so I'm just not a big fan of beer. Yeah, honestly, I honestly, what my first probably taste, because my gram and my mom really didn't drink at all, so there wasn't any beer in the house.
Yeah,
and when my dad,
it's probably for the better.
Yeah, and when my dad was here, I have no idea what he drank. All I know is like the one local brewery, Iron City. Supposedly, it's people here drink it. But when people come in to Pittsburgh to drink it, they say it's horrible.
So it's an acquired taste.
Yeah. Or it's one of those things you eat only because it's local.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's enough about beer. So we've gone over a few things about sky, dealing with skies in the photos, and like I said, there's so many more ways you can deal with it, from like a very basic level to a pretty deep advanced level, like Dwight does with these tonal ranges and that. So I think I think that's about all we can do right now to cover it, especially since we're out of sample images. But now I should note that this is a complete opposite kind of, in a way, problem that Shane deals with, because Shane deals with the night sky. So he's dealing with dark skies. And that's a whole another topic. If you
Mhm.
want to know more about that, go to his channel. There's a link down in the show notes. But so I think what we'll do now is we'll move on to our recent photos, and he says, haha. And we've got a selection, I think is a pretty good variety. And so I've put them in the order that they came into our shared photos library. So Dave, we're going to go through your two first, and then we'll do your two, Dwight, and then we'll do mine. No, wait, my two second, and then Dwight's third. Okay. All right. So here is Dave's first one.
So this one obviously heavily edited. This was another going out at lunch, and across the street there is a little bit of a trail. So I liked when I took the picture, it had that canopy look to it, and it had the path look different from the regular greenery around it. So I went into Picasso to do my first edit on it that way. Got kind of the general look, got the first white border going around it. And then I threw it into a Snapseed to get the additional kind of black broken border going around it. So it's kind of a layered border look there. And did some additional work with the colors, including getting that what was when I originally did it in Picasso, the white border around it. And I don't know how it turned out this way. It's one of those things you kind of throw some filters on it. And I think on this one, I used the Camera Plus filters. Occasionally it does stuff that's unexpected. So giving that red bottom right kind of reddish pink going up to like a bluish in the upper left with the gradient on the outside. And it's one of those happy accidents. I really like the way that looked. And I don't think I could have done it on my own, trying to figure out a slider to give that kind of gradient look to it.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, these are fun. It's fun playing around in these programs. And I think, Dave, what you kind of did was just played with it and bounced it through a few, like Picasso and another one, until you were happy with it. And that's how these things happen. So, yeah, it's fun. When I first looked at that, I was like, is he standing in the middle of a stream? Because it looked like the grass was laying down to some type of current or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think it's because the main trail is kind of at the end of this road. So this is kind of the access road they have set up from the main road to the trail itself. So they can, so if you have to get a tractor or something, if something happens like a tree falls, you need to get a vehicle back there to work on the trail. This is the access road. So that's why the grass is kind of tamped down there.
Okay.
Well, I like the composition of it. Some people may think that there's a little too much foreground at the bottom, but I kind of like it because it gives it a balance between the flattened down grass covering the bottom half, and then the trees up in the top half, and then just around the center of the frame you've got. It's like the meat of the sandwich. You've got, where the path disappears in the distance, and then a little more, tree detail on each side, and even what looks like some flowers on the left-hand side of the path. So I think it's a well-balanced composition, and obviously blue skies, but you didn't have to worry too much about a bright sky in this one because of all the foliage. So
exactly. And one thing I did do was used inside of Snapseed, basically that bullseye, the circular adjustment right in the middle, right where the path ends, just to brighten up that little circle right there.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Little spotlight.
Yep. Yeah, good idea. Yeah. That's actually a really good idea. Because I put a panel together last fall of, there was this these woods, and then there was a lot of grass and things leading into that, and there was a path where you could drive a vehicle in, like just right into the woods. And I showed Shane Mostyn and I think some of the other Bloody Legends guys, what do y'all think of this? And Shane said, and he was right. He said if the path was a little more visible or accented a little better, then it would make a better image. And sure enough, I did that, just basically what you did there, Dave, by brightening up that center part, and it did. It made it made the path appear a little more visible, and it just made for a better image. So.
Well, it helps draw you into the image too, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
The leading lights take you right to it.
Yep. And by doing that, Dave, you made it more visible to see how that path goes to the right a bit, and then it almost looks like it maybe takes a little jog to the left and disappears. At least that's how the brush strokes make it look, which I kind of like.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so that's the first one. And then here's your second one.
And this is something that we bought recently. I want to say at Costco. They had these two birds. I forget exactly what type they are, but you basically kind of lawn ornaments, but they're nice metal. And we really love the blue coloring of it. And this was after a rain. And I just loved the way I tried getting different angles on here to just get the raindrops. The raindrops on just to get sharp enough to show, and including the ones that are kind of holding on barely, they're getting ready to fall off. So I made sure that I sharpened the main part a good amount, the bird itself, to sharpen it so you can see the details with the raindrops. But the problem was the background was getting a little too sharpened because it was sharpening the whole image. I took this one, put it in the photo room, and it said, okay, here's your main subject. So I was able to then adjust the background and darken the background a little bit and make it a little blurrier to bring out that foreground a lot more.
Yeah, it's always nice to be able to isolate your subject from the background and do individual adjustments. I like the detail in the water. Now, are all those colors inherent in this?
It is, yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if you tweaked some hue and saturation. Yeah.
No, the only thing I really did was just kind of boost it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, you may not see it as much, but no, like the greens and the different shades of blue and the beak going to a yellow. Yeah, that's all. And that's one of the things that kind of drew us to these two items in the store, because it had the dimension, and this is actually metal, and it's a 3-dimensional item.
Yeah.
So this isn't just a flat piece of metal. Everything's rounded, so you have the additional look to it there too.
Well, that's a good eye, just catching that. You probably just walked by it and you said, hey, look at those raindrops. And is that a portrait mode shot or a macro?
The closest
Not sure if it kicked over into macro. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it may have not kicked over into macro because I wasn't that close to it.
Okay.
And in terms of portrait mode, I did not put it into portrait mode.
Okay.
So
because it'll recognize it like an animal and go into portrait mode, right? Yeah.
Right.
So you could,
or it'll just it'll retain the portrait data for later, right?
Yeah. So you could probably go into that photo and adjust the lens blur too if you wanted, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And I thought this was glass. To find out that it's metal, that's really interesting. That's some pretty vibrant paint, and I know it's more vibrant looking in the photo than it was in real life, but still, it's got a lot of color to it. And I think you did the right thing too by dimming down the background a little bit to let it show through. And I just like the way that you caught the raindrops on it, especially with all the ones down at the bottom ready to fall off. And, another shot well done. Oh, okay. So this is my first one. There's a farm not too far from here. If you remember last fall, I showed some pictures of a sunflower field. Well, this is the same place, and so they're doing two things this year. Right now is the tulips, and they're just about actually done. Another week they'll likely be done with, and then in the fall they're going to plant they're going to have the sunflowers again. So this was, I think, about 250,000 tulips at this farm that they planted, and it's just really cool. They have this windmill. It's to say how big it was, I think without the blades, I think the windmill probably stood about I want to say about 20 or 30 feet maybe. And so it's probably not as big as what you would find in Holland, but I thought this was an interesting composition to show the windmill and to put all the tulips in the foreground. And so when I went out there, I didn't stay long because the black flies were absolutely furious. It was just crazy. And I sprayed off on my arms and my legs. It was hot. It was a warm day, so I had shorts on. But I wanted to kind of show tulips with the windmill. And then luckily the background was pretty much unobtrusive, or nothing really that didn't belong there. But this is a 3-minute exposure with re-expose. So I had my iPhone 15 Pro Max on the tripod, taking these exposures while I ran around and took pictures of other things. And so this is where I used a gradient in the clouds. So from the top down, and I stopped the gradient right about the tree line. And I just decreased the exposure just a little bit to bring out some of the dark gray parts of the clouds. And I think I boosted the contrast a little bit. But I also did some dodging and burning, in the real heavier, darker areas to just emphasize that. Because the before picture, there wasn't a lot of those details present. But it's just one of those things that you can get out of a raw photo. So like re-expose just shoots raw photos. And I was able to get some of those details back. And basically, I think I used a linear gradient on the bottom part too to help emphasize the tulips a little better, because everything was pretty kind of bright, didn't have a lot of contrast to it in that raw photo. So I had to kind of play around with it and get these things looking a little better. And I just slightly desaturated the greens and took the luminance down in the greens as well, because it was just a little overpowering. It didn't allow the tulips themselves to really pop. So
And Greg,
that's basically
what program did you do
the
that
story
in?
in the edit.
What program did you do the gradient in?
Luminar Neo.
Okay.
Yeah, on the desktop. I'm really liking that program. I have a folder in my Photos app of just Luminar Neo edits, and I got a folder on my Mac, and it's growing and growing. So really digging it.
Well, let me ask you, how big is the windmill? Is it full size or is it a smaller one?
I think you could walk into that door.
Okay.
That's why I think it's about 20 feet high or so.
I think Shane wants to light that thing up and some flowers around it and do an astro shot.
Oh yeah. It would be really cool. They charge money to go in here. And you couldn't, I don't think I could go in after hours like that unless I had permission, or snuck in. But yeah, that would be a cool shot.
Yeah, that's
now he's got me thinking.
Yeah.
And you didn't come by anyone named Don Quixote complaining about the windmills, right?
No, I don't know who that is, but but yeah, and as far as I know, I don't think the blades even turn on that.
Oh, okay, so it's more decorative then.
And I mean, okay, just a second now. I'm trying to think. Maybe it's not that big. Maybe it's not full size, because I think I have. And the reason I thought that is because there was people in the background, but you could only see them basically, from their waist up. but I think it's because the field kind of goes down in behind there, and they looked smaller than they really were. Gosh, I wish I could remember how big that thing was, but I'm pretty sure I took a picture, and the deck that goes around the outside of the windmill, I think I was maybe taller than that. So I think that thing's smaller than I remember. Again, the black flies are so bad. I mean, if you've seen Shane's videos where he's out in the bush and he's going like this with the black flies, that's what I was doing the whole time I was there. It was nasty. So I was only there maybe 15 minutes and I got out. But yeah, it was fun. It was cool. So that's my first one.
Yeah, Greg, I wanted to add a couple comments on that, and I think there's a lot. There's a lot going on here, and I love this photo. You've got the leading lines of the tulips going into the windmill there, which is on the right third, which is awesome. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your use of the linear gradient on the top and the bottom. And I normally do that with most of my landscape photos anyway. And what I usually do is I'll create a curves adjustment in the multiply blend mode, which darkens the entire photo. But then I'll go into my linear gradient tool and I'll just pull down a little bit of a curtain from the top. And then I will, kind of adjust, where it's going to be hitting. And then I'll do the same thing on the bottom. And that also draws the viewer into the center of the photo, because sometimes if you don't do that and it's bright all from top to bottom, the eyes just get confused as to where to look. But you're helping us look in and see the subject here. So I think that's well done. And then it also, aside from the artistic approach of the dodging and burning and adding more contrast. So yeah, good job.
Yeah, thank you. I've seen tutorials on YouTube where they use these linear gradients to do just exactly what you said there, and I guess I may have done that without realizing it. I did it to deal with the detail in the clouds, and I took this as a long exposure, because if I just took a still, the clouds would have been so blunt with their detail. Like there would have been a lot of blunt areas. And I just don't think that, I think they would have kind of overpowered the, the flowers at the bottom. I think that it would have taken away from the essence of what the image is supposed to be about. So, but yeah, I think I kind of did that maybe in the back of my mind after watching some of these tutorials about just that. And the nice thing about into the middle.
Yeah, the nice thing about Photoshop is when you do a gradient, there's something called blend if, and you can actually pull the tone out that you don't want the adjustment to cover. So in this case, like sometimes when you do a gradient and there's already a dark corner, it'll make it darker. So if I pull that darks 2 out of there, it brings the light back into it. I'll show you sometime. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'd like to see how that works, because I don't know if I really highly doubt that Luminar Neo has that feature, and if Affinity Photo has it. But I'm still not going to subscribe to Lightroom or Photoshop.
I'm never leaving. But
yeah,
but I'll try. Luminar, I know has it has.
I think it has blending,
right? But I'll have to play with it and see if I can get it. But yeah.
Yeah. So my second one, this was, I was looking out the front window of the house, and I thought I saw these sun rays coming down, and I thought, whoa, what is this? So I went outside in my sock feet, and just took my phone out, and this was, I believe, a ProRAW photo, because I used the Apple Camera app, and I used it 2 times, and I cheated a little bit. The sun rays are genuine. The only ones that aren't are the little white ones going up to the left from where the sun is, because this was blown out. That bright area was blown out. So in Luminar Neo, I added the sun, and I adjusted the sun rays on it, to be as minimal as possible. I just wanted to cover the blown out area that was actually a really weird shape. And, by putting the sun right there in the middle of the image, I think it kind of hid that area, because it was completely blown out. I couldn't get them back no matter what I tried. So, and then basically all I did was do some, I think I think I actually used a dramatic tool in Luminar Neo, and then the Mystic as well, just to kind of get the look I wanted. And I think the sky is a little saturated, maybe, to help bring some of the blue out. And I think that's about it.
Yeah, I love the look of the rays coming down, and it shooting into the sun like this it's always an issue because it will, especially with the iPhone when you're doing automatic, even Pro Brawl, you're still pretty much doing automatic everything. And it's
Yeah.
trying to adjust for that bright sky, and you have those heavy shadows not too far away from it. It's not like one side versus the other side of the image. They're relatively close together, and trying to deal with that. And like I said, the rays coming down, especially since there's dark clouds right behind them, I think really helps to emphasize them also.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done,
Yeah.
Gregson. Now you said the sun was blown out, so you put another one on top of it in Luminar? You
Yeah,
placed the sun
because
center
the
right
one
there?
Yeah, because in Luminar Neo, it softened it. Like,
Yeah.
it still looks kinda blown out, but it softened it to the point where it kinda gave it more of a round shape instead of it looked like an island in the middle
Yeah.
of the
And you
frame.
weren't getting clipping warnings on your histogram, with this?
I don't think
Okay.
so. I think it covered that up.
Okay, yeah. And the sun rays are cool because those almost look like something that you can add in Neo as well on the
Mhm.
lower right, but
Mhm.
yeah, that's, uh, um, yeah, that's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, it's not often you can get this many sun rays naturally. Like I say, the
Yep.
only ones that Luminar put in there are the top left as it's kinda going to the upper left-hand corner. Um, but these other big rays that are down near the bottom and off to the right, they were there. They were natural.
And that
And of
transition
course,
from the
I
light clouds to the dark clouds it's like a line was snapped. That's pretty amazing.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And I with contrast and things like that, I emphasize those rays. But again, they were there.
Mhm.
I didn't, something I thought was really cool is near the bottom center, just above those trees, like right in the middle, but near the bottom, there's that bright spot of cloud that, the sun's hitting it, and then it's causing these rays,
Mhm.
like the opening above it is causing these, these different rays and that. Um, I was just mesmerized by the whole thing, and I had to be quick because, they were moving a little bit, and I thought, I don't want to lose these sun rays. So I took about 4 or 5 shots, and
Mhm.
this is I think the one that turned out the best.
It was nice. You did in Pro Raw, which is cool, and then that mystical filter will take some of that feeling of the over crunchiness out of it. So that's good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that was fun. So, Dwight, this is your first one.
Yeah, so that I was at the mission this weekend, and I just want I've taken a picture of this hallway so many times, and I'll try to catch somebody coming out one of the doors, make it a black and white, add some grain, and make it look like it's back in 1776 when this thing was founded. Which is old for us here in the United States. Um, but what I wanted to do again was show depth, and I've never come back from to this perspective to take the shot, and I just like the leading lines coming in. Now I shot this in Pro Raw as well, and I did a lot of burning here because the foreground was a little bit too bright. So I isolated, all of these tonal ranges in the foreground, and I darkened them up a little bit, and I was able to even isolate the shadows of the tree, and I was able to burn those in just a little bit more to give those a little bit of accent as well, to be more representative of what I saw, in the scene. So there's actually a lot of work that went into this, but it's not completely apparent. Like the second bench on the left was too bright, and the bench on the right. So I isolated that tonal value, and I burned that down a little bit, so because it was drawing the eye in too much. But yeah, it's just an opportunity to use Pro Raw again, which was too crunchy for me. I can't stand it. So I did bring this one into Luminar Neo as well, and I added a little bit of mystical just to take some of that crunch off, and a little bit of glow as well, just a little bit. And I was actually pretty happy with the result. It's not my standard raw, Bayer raw shot, but I think this captured some good detail. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the fact that the flowers are not in focus. So they're definitely and the red is just, it's not overblown red, but it's a very powerful red.
Mm-hmm.
So you get your attention there with the more muted earth tones going down the hallway there. But it makes you feel like you just kind of have to duck as you're about ready to go down.
Yeah.
Or you're
I
just
actually toned those flowers. That's a bougainvillea that's blooming, and I actually had to tone that down a little bit, and it was really red and bright.
This is where a RGB histogram really would be valuable, because you can decrease chances are the red on the red channel on that histogram was blown out. And this is where you can use that histogram to dial your exposure down, even with the EV slider in whether it's halide or reflex or pro camera. They've all got it, and you can dial that down so that the red comes within clipping. You might end up with a dark image, but then you can get that back, of course, in post. And that is a little trick that I learned. It was Halide that talked about that. I think maybe in a blog post or something. They were talking about the importance of the RGB histogram or whatever.
Yeah,
and I have
yeah, and there's a way to do that. You can also isolate all of the colors in the spectrum and change their luminosity value. So in this case, that's what I did here. I made actually the reds a little bit darker, and then if they get too flat, you can increase the contrast a little bit. But that's kind of
right, yeah.
And that really translates to a curves adjustment, but this is just a little bit easier working with the slider and the specific color.
Yeah. So I mean, we're basically learning lots about editing and how to control colors and tones of images in this episode, which is pretty cool. Now I think shooting Pro Raw was pretty key in getting the blue sky to come out in the background.
That was pretty washed out. I isolated the sky.
Was it?
With a luminosity mask and outputted that to a hue saturation adjustment, and I boosted that up a little bit. You wouldn't have been able to tell that was actually a blue sky unless I did that. So,
because Pro Raw generally does a good job of, getting the blueness in the sky in an image like this.
Yeah. Well, as Shane was saying here, it's hard to kind of explain what you did, I think, on the editing process unless you see the before. But that was really gray with with a real slight tint of blue, which still would have been fine. I could have overcooked it on the blue a little bit too. So,
yeah. Well, maybe what we could do, guys, is put our before pictures in our shared folder, and when I put this post on the Facebook group, or on the Facebook page rather, for the podcast, we could put the before and after.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea,
so people can see them. Yeah. So, folks, if you're watching or if you're listening afterwards, the post will go on Facebook once the audio podcast goes live. So sometime on Wednesday, I'll be putting all this stuff up on our Facebook page, not the group, but there's a Facebook page for the iPhoneography podcast. Easiest way to get there is iPhoneography.ca. And that you'll see all the past episodes, the show notes and whatnot, and links and everything else that we put in. And I'll certainly add our before photos, because I think that's actually a pretty good idea, especially when we're talking so much about how we edit these. But it'd be great to see the befores and afters. So, and same goes with like Dave. Your before pictures are going to be so different.
Yes, they will. Yeah, yeah. Maybe not necessarily the bird, but
The bird, yeah.
the pathway. Yes, it may be to the point of, oh, that's the exact same photo.
Yeah. Like, I've seen some of your befores that we've, when you've talked about, Picasso and things like that, and then you'd send us the before after the show type of thing. And wow, talk about night and day.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So this next one is so cool.
Yeah,
Like,
I called this
so cool.
Yeah, thanks. I called this coming in for a soft landing because the flower was soft. It's interesting because as we're walking into the mission, there's a perimeter with a bunch of flowers, and there's cactus out there, and these cactus flowers were blooming, and there were bees everywhere, and Diane was just standing there tapping her foot, waiting for me to,
Yeah.
catching a bee like this is, 1 in 40 or 50 shots, right? And,
Yeah.
it just worked out. And this was, I believe this was with the Moment long range macro. I had the reflex out, but it was pulling in too tight. The reflex, long range, tele and the
the super telephoto,
the super telephoto with the macro
200.
adjustment was pulling in too tight for these
Right.
things. But the key here was I kept the photo soft. I didn't do any sharpening or anything like that. I brought it it was a raw photo. I brought it into Topaz Photo AI. I upscaled it because I had cropped this, pretty extensively. So I was down a lot of pixels. So I upscaled it 2 times. And then Topaz AI is smart enough to know what the subject is in the photo. And I initiated an adjustment to sharpen the subject only. So thank you, Topaz Photo AI. I thought they did a good job on this one. Again, this would have been good to see the before shot as well. But yeah, thanks, Greg. It was just, it's lucky. I think all the colors work together. I think, maintain the softness. And man, I almost got stung a few times, but it was worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, and this is the one. Of course, the complications with doing something, especially an insect so small like this, is that I love the angle you got it at. Where not only are the wings level, it looks like it's gliding, which we know bees do not glide, but just it looks like it's coming from the flower, kind of going up and about ready to come down to the bottom right.
And there's flex in the wings too, which is indicative of the stress of what they endure to keep the bee in the air, right?
Mm-hmm.
Much like an airplane.
Yeah. And especially when you get to smaller insects like this, when they try to look at, extreme slow-mo on how the wings move on here, and they're like, yeah, we can't replicate that.
Right.
There's so much 3D motion going on that needs to happen that you just can't say, well, we're going to change it and just have it flap up and down. No, you need that torque in there, and you need the way it like I said, it isn't just a straight up and down. It's a up and down with a little bit of a twist to it.
You see that left wing?
Yeah.
That left wing is turned down, which tells me if he flaps, that's going to turn him left. He or she left.
Yeah.
That's probably how they turn.
It's so cool. This is an award winner in my opinion.
Yeah.
The areas of sharpness are just spot on. The legs dangling down. There's even, it looks like a little droplet of something in the one, I don't know, foot, claw, whatever bees have. And then, that sharpness goes up the legs, carries around the body on that focal plane, and then goes right out down the wing on the, on the front part of the wing. And it's just absolutely like you couldn't have planned it any better, to get a shot like this. I got a bee flying like this into a sunflower last year, and I got some pretty decent sharp areas, but I don't think they're as sharp as this. I'm gonna have to pull them out, side by side here and see who did it better.
Yeah, Greg,
I think you did.
Offline we can walk through my edit and I can show you what I did. So we
and also, and like one thing I think a lot of people when they first get into macro, they want to over sharpen everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's the I got this thing that does macro and I want to make this. It doesn't have to be overly sharpened,
right?
You even the parts which are in focus is sharp. They're not like uber sharp. There's still a natural fuzziness to it.
Yeah, what I normally. Yep. Sorry,
that's kind of the different. I'll say that's kind of difference between someone who's and nothing wrong with doing that because that's the way you learn. But when you see people who are a little more experienced and a little more reserved with hitting the editing tools by saying, "Oh, I want that sharp as possible. Move the slider. I want that. Move the slider." Having that restraint, making it look more natural.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
That's kind of the next step.
Yeah, thanks. When I first started editing, my tendency was to push all the sliders to the right.
Mm-hmm.
More saturated, the better. More vibrance, the better. And, I think that's key is when you start learning how to back off. But this sharpness came out of Photo AI, which was pretty interesting. What I normally do is I'll crop, I'll make all my adjustments, I'll clean everything up, and then I'll bring it over into Adobe Camera Raw, which is, Photoshop's Lightroom equivalent. And then I'll do a global, raise the texture, little bit of clarity. I don't normally touch the dehaze slider, and I'll bring it back into Photoshop with a black mask. And then I'll just brush in, the little areas that I want, to be sharp, with a white brush at maybe even a lower opacity. But I think Topaz nailed it on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sure did. And with the way the sun's hitting the bee, it almost looks like you used a flash.
Oh,
it has that, that look to it.
I did,
which is really cool.
I did bring this into Luminar, and I did bring some sun in here. Brought a little bit coming from the upper right, just a little bit, just to kind of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, didn't want to. I didn't want to be too crazy with the rays or anything like that, but I did light up. I did light up that upper right-hand corner, which projected out onto the bee. I think
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't know it, right? You wouldn't know it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of key, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow, this is just crazy good.
Yeah, thanks.
Where was this when I was doing my book? It would have made the perfect cover.
Happy mistake. Happy mistake.
Yeah, for sure. Well, all right. Well, that's our recent photos, and man, these batches of photos that we're talking about here just keep getting better and better over time. I don't know. It's maybe I'm just so thrown back by Dwight, your bee, and Dave, that bird. The color that you've given it. Man, we got some good stuff. So anyway, all right. Well, I guess that's gonna be it for the evening. Thanks everybody for tuning in on YouTube, and once this comes out in the audio, thanks for listening. I've had some some positive comments from people in the various Facebook groups that I'm in that catch the show, and that's always encouraging. So don't forget, if you want to leave us a message, you can do so using the VoiceCast link in the show notes, and because we'd love to hear the feedback, good or bad. We always want to improve the show. So in fact, Dwight and I were talking before we went on the air about a couple of things that we've heard from people, close friends, whatever. And, we're going to work on incorporating some of these ideas into the show, whether it's how long we go or, just the stuff that we talk about, whatever. We're going to do what we can to improve it. And, so thanks, guys. Great discussion as always. And I guess we'll see everybody on the next one.
Sounds good. Hey, thanks. Good seeing you guys again.
Have a great one, everyone.